Some monsters hide in forests, some monsters sleep in tombs, and some make breakfast. Kiss the kids, wave at the neighbors, because the Obayifo isn't a dead thing that crawled out of the ground. It's a person, a living witch, named in Akan tradition, linked to Bai, sorcery, corrupted power, the kind that feeds. In the stories, the Obayifo can leave the body at night, moving unseen, hunting the most vulnerable, children who slowly waste away, families who cannot explain the sickness. And here's where it gets dangerous. The Obayifo is not just a monster story. It's a moral warning about envy, greed, and the rot that spreads when a community begins to believe the enemy is already inside the house. Europe had its vampires, its fear of the night. But in Ghana, especially in Akan and Asante communities, the nightmare isn't an undead noble. It's the person who knows your name, who knows where you sleep, and who smiles like nothing is wrong. Tonight, we're opening File 010. We're going to follow the Obayifo through oral tradition and early written records, through colonial contact, missionary notes, and the strange way European vampire language tried to pin this thing down. And we'll look at what this belief does inside real communities, and why it refuses to die. Because if the Obayifo is real in any sense that matters, it lives in the space between fear and accusation. Welcome back to Monster Files. Before the Obayifo ever appeared in books, reports, or colonial archives, it lived where the most dangerous ideas live longest: spoken memory. Among the Akan, especially the Asante, the Obayifo was not a fairy tale creature. It was a known category of threat, a word spoken carefully, an accusation that could fracture families. In traditional accounts, an Obayifo is a living human being who possesses Bai, witchcraft power. This power is not learned casually. It is believed to be inherited, awakened, or spiritually acquired, often without the person fully understanding it at first. What matters is not how the power is gained, but what it does. According to oral testimony recorded in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Obayifo is believed to leave the physical body at night, travel unseen, sometimes as a faint, unnatural light, feed on the life force of others, cause wasting sickness, especially in children, drain vitality from crops, livestock, and prosperity. Victims are not attacked violently. They fade. Children weaken without clear cause. Infants die after long, quiet illness. Farms fail, even when rain and labor are sufficient. So the Obayifo was feared more than forest spirits or demons, because you could live next to one. One of the most consistent elements in Akan oral tradition is this: an Obayifo looks normal. They farm, they cook, they attend funerals. But elders say they can be recognized by subtle signs: a restless gaze that never settles, an unusual fixation on food, a tendency to linger near kitchens, births, and the sick. In Ashanti proverb tradition, it is said, "If someone cries, 'There goes a witch,' and you turn to look, then you are the one they are calling." The implication is clear. Witches know themselves, and guilt betrays them faster than evidence. Some of the most detailed traditional accounts come from Akomfo, ritual priests, and from witch-finders. Their role was to detect and neutralize Obayifo within a community. In interviews recorded by R.S. Rattray in the early 1900s, a well-known Ashanti witch-finder named Yao Adawura described witches as members of a hidden society, organized, cooperative, and intentional. According to his testimony, witches recognize one another. They meet at night in secret locations. They share spiritual meals taken from victims. They serve a greater evil force linked to the forest. That force is Sasa Bansam, a vampiric forest demon. In this worldview, the Obayifo does not act alone. They are agents. Unlike European vampires, the Obayifo does not always bite. Traditional accounts describe feeding as spiritual extraction. The witch presses against the outside of a house, or targets a sleeping victim through supernatural connection. The result is always the same. Strength disappears. Weight drops. The victim dries up. To the Akan mind, this is not metaphor. It is cause and effect. Traditional Akan society did not treat witchcraft as symbolic. It was actionable. Methods used to identify an Obayifo included divination involving the dead naming their killer, oath-taking at shrines, poison ordeals, confession under ritual pressure. If confirmed, punishment ranged from public exposure, ritual neutralization of power, banishment, execution, historically, often strangulation. These practices were later restricted under colonial rule, but the belief never vanished. These primary traditions show us something essential. The Obayifo is not folklore in the modern sense. It is an explanatory system, a way to answer questions like, why did this child die and not the others? Why did this farm fail when the rains came? Why does suffering seem to cluster around certain people? The Obayifo gives suffering a face. And once suffering has a face, it can be confronted. Or blamed. The Obayifo doesn't begin as a monster. It begins as an answer. And answers, especially the wrong ones, have consequences. When European administrators, missionaries, and anthropologists arrived on the Gold Coast in the 19th century, they were not encountering a myth. They were encountering a problem. Witchcraft accusations were real. People were being named. Punishments were being carried out. And no amount of preaching erased the fear. So the British did what empires always do when faced with something they do not understand. They translated it. Early colonial officials consistently rendered Obayifo as witch in English reports. On the surface, this made sense. The behaviors sounded familiar. Night travel, harmful magic, secret gatherings, harm to children and crops. But something did not fit. European witches cursed. They poisoned. They blighted. The Obayifo fed. Victims did not convulse or die suddenly. They wasted. And that detail did not go unnoticed. By the early 1900s, some colonial writers stopped using witch alone. They reached for another word: vampire. In Ashanti, published in 1923, British anthropologist R.S. Rattray recorded local testimony describing the Obayifo as a kind of human vampire whose chief delight is to suck the blood of children, whereby the latter pine and die. This became one of the most frequently quoted descriptions of the Obayifo in Western literature, because once that sentence was printed, the Obayifo entered the European monster catalog, not as superstition, not as metaphor, but as evidence. Missionary records from the late 19th and early 20th centuries show deep anxiety about witchcraft belief. Not because missionaries believed the Obayifo existed, but because people acted as if it did. Witch-finding movements grew. Shrines promised protection. Entire communities participated in rituals to expose hidden witches. From the missionary perspective, this was dangerous pagan belief. From the local perspective, it was self-defense. Some missionaries attempted to reinterpret Obayifo attacks as disease, malnutrition, infant mortality, or psychological fear. But those explanations failed at the emotional level. They explained how. They did not explain why this family. So the belief endured. British colonial governments officially outlawed witch executions and ritual ordeals. But they quickly learned something uncomfortable. Banning a belief does not neutralize it. By the early 1900s, colonial reports described the rise of anti-witchcraft shrines and movements, some so large and organized that authorities hesitated to suppress them. One such movement, centered on an elderly priestess, claimed the power to expose Obayifo and strip them of witchcraft. Ironically, these movements often aligned with colonial interests. They reduced vigilante violence. They promoted moral restraint. They discouraged secret killings. The Obayifo had become too socially embedded to erase. Once colonial ethnography circulated in Europe, the Obayifo escaped academia. Occult writers, most notably Montague Summers, adopted Rattray's descriptions and folded the Obayifo into global vampire lore. In these retellings, cultural context was stripped away. Witchcraft became monstrosity. Moral systems became exotic horror. The Obayifo was no longer a social explanation. It was a creature. This is how the Obayifo ends up in vampire encyclopedias today, often without mention of Akan belief systems, colonial disruption, or the real-world consequences of witchcraft accusations. The Obayifo is not described as a creature with a fixed physical form. That is the first and most important detail. Across Akan oral tradition and early recorded testimony, the Obayifo is understood to be a living human being whose danger manifests through behavior, not appearance. By day, there is nothing visibly inhuman. No claws, no fangs, no deformities. The threat begins after dark. In daylight hours, the Obayifo is indistinguishable from others in the community. They farm, they trade, they attend social gatherings. Traditional accounts focus not on bodies, but on behavior. Commonly noted irregularities include an unsettled or darting gaze, an unusual fixation on food or eating, frequent presence near kitchens, births, or the sick, a tendency to linger rather than participate. These traits are not considered proof, only warning signs. Akan belief is explicit. A witch does not reveal itself willingly. At night, the Obayifo is believed to exit the physical body, either partially or fully. Sources differ on how this occurs. Some describe the soul leaving the body during sleep. Others describe a spirit form separating while the body remains still. In either case, the body is left behind. What travels is not flesh. It is essence. During this state, the Obayifo is reported to move rapidly and silently, enter homes without opening doors, feed without waking the victim, and leave no visible injury. Several accounts describe the traveling form as emitting a faint, unnatural light, often compared to phosphorescence or the glow of fireflies. This light is not meant to illuminate. It is understood as evidence of power. The Obayifo does not always drink blood in the literal sense. Traditional descriptions emphasize vital extraction. Victims experience gradual weakness, loss of weight, long-term illness without clear cause, and eventual death. Children and infants are the most frequently cited victims. Feeding is believed to occur over time, not in a single event. This is why Obayifo attacks are rarely recognized immediately. The victim fades. The same mechanism used against people is believed to affect crops. Colonial-era accounts record that Obayifo were blamed for cocoa pods drying on the tree, sap vanishing from healthy plants, and farms failing despite proper conditions. In traditional belief, this is not symbolic. The Obayifo feeds on life force, human or botanical. The Obayifo doesn't break into your home. It's already been invited. In modern Ghana, the Obayifo is no longer spoken about in the same open, communal way it once was. But it has not disappeared. It has shifted. Publicly, many Ghanaians, especially in urban centers, reject witchcraft language outright. Christianity, formal education, and state law have reshaped how these ideas are discussed. Privately, the belief remains intact. Accusations are no longer shouted, they are whispered. A sudden illness, repeated misfortune, a child who fails to thrive. The vocabulary may change, the suspicion does not. Rather than erasing the Obayifo, Christianity in Ghana has largely reframed it. In many churches, especially Pentecostal and charismatic movements, the Obayifo is no longer called a witch. It is called a demonic agent, a spiritual parasite, a vessel for evil forces. Deliverance replaces witch-finding. Prayer replaces shrine oaths. But the underlying assumption remains the same. Some people secretly drain others. The Obayifo survives, wearing a new name. One of the most visible modern consequences of witchcraft belief in Ghana is the existence of witch camps. These are settlements where accused witches, most often elderly women, are sent for protection from violence. The Obayifo is not always named directly, but the logic is familiar. Misfortune requires an agent. The agent must be human. Removal restores balance. The camps are often framed as humanitarian solutions, but their existence confirms that witchcraft belief remains socially active, not symbolic. The Obayifo does not fit cleanly into any single monster category. That is not a flaw in the record, it is the point. Across all accounts, the Obayifo is consistently described as alive, human in origin, socially embedded, and supernaturally augmented. It is not undead. It is not a spirit-only entity. It is not a non-human creature. The Obayifo operates through witchcraft agency, not biological mutation, and not post-death transformation. Despite frequent comparison, the Obayifo does not meet strict vampire criteria. There is no death to reanimation cycle, no dependence on physical blood consumption, no reliance on darkness for survival, no vulnerability to sunlight, stakes, or burial rites. The vampire label emerges from external comparison, not internal tradition. Functionally similar does not mean categorically identical. The Obayifo is not an independent supernatural being. It does not predate humanity. It does not require summoning. It does not exist without a human host. While associated with forest demons such as Sasa Bansam, the Obayifo is not possessed in the Western sense. The power is internalized. Across global folklore, the Obayifo aligns most closely with witch-vampire hybrids, for example, Adze, Asiman, soul-traveling witches, and human entities that extract life or vitality. These form a distinct subcategory, separate from revenants, ghosts, or free-roaming spirits. For Monster Files indexing purposes, the Obayifo is best categorized as a human-origin predatory witch, a nocturnal energy drainer, a threat that is internal, social. This classification highlights the most dangerous trait of all. The Obayifo originates inside the community it harms. The Obayifo isn't something that comes for you. It's something that grows beside you. Night comes early over the compound. The air is still. No wind, no sound loud enough to cover a child's breathing. Inside the hut, the infant rests against the mother's chest. The crying stopped days ago. Outside, something moves. Not footsteps, something closer. No door opens. At first light, the child does not wake. The women wash the body. There are no wounds, no marks, only skin that feels too light. Someone speaks a word. Quietly. The grandmother does not argue. She only listens. By morning, she has walked beyond the boundary stones. No one follows. The village breathes again. No one ever agrees on what truly happened. Why Tier 2 and not higher or lower? The Obayifo is not a fictional construct. Documented belief, documented action, and documented consequence rule out Tier 0. It is more than a symbolic metaphor. Accusations, exile, deaths, and community response place it above Tier 1. It is not cryptid adjacent. There is no physical organism, no environmental trace, no repeatable sightings. It does not qualify as a folkloric real hybrid. There is no measurable phenomenon that exists independently of belief. Tier 2 refers to a belief system so persistent, so specific, and so behavior-shaping that it produces real-world effects without requiring a confirmed physical entity. The monster exists as an echo of fear, of morality, of power, and of accusation, repeating wherever the conditions allow it. The Obayifo does not qualify as a physical entity, but its shadow has shaped real lives. That places it here. Tier 2, Mythic Echo. The Obayifo was never something you could hunt, never something you could photograph, never something you could trap. It lived in suspicion, in fear, in the quiet moments when grief needed an answer. Whether the cause was supernatural, psychological, or something far more human, the damage was real. And that is why this file remains open, because some monsters do not vanish when belief fades. They wait. This has been Monster Files, File 010, the Obayifo. The light shines the brightest in the dark.
The lights were on, the coffee's gone. This file said easy, that was wrong. One small fix, then three more broke. I asked for truth, it gave me folklore jokes. I said simple, it said define. I said now, it said give me time. I argued with the archive talked right back. It said this is correct. I said no, that's not a fact. It smiled in footnotes and citations stacked. Some files don't like being unpacked. The render failed, the clock ran fast. Somehow 5 hours slipped right past. I fixed one thing, it shifted to the archive said that's normal, you're new. Why did you change that? It says I improved it. That's not improvement. It says statistically speaking it is. I argued with the archive. It never raised its tone. It said you're not wrong, just not alone. So if a frame jumps or the timing bends, that's not a glitch. That's the archive having the last word again.